Welcome back to Season 1 of Reflections, the power and peril of real estate partnerships. This is our third and final installment. Some might even call it our Return of the Jedi episode. And that kind of tracks, because we are turning to 3 Jedis of the industry. Or if you don't enjoy Star Wars as much as I do, you can call them subject matter experts. We've seen the benefits and risks of partnerships up close and personal through the first 2 parts. But now it's time to seek the sage advice of the pros who are here to guide us towards a successful partnership, should we be brave enough to pursue it. Let's dive in. Hey, Coach B here. Wouldn't it be nice to know if a partnership is a good fit for you before investing all that time, money, and energy into one that ultimately doesn't work out? Well, you're in luck. We created a quick and easy quiz called How Partner Ready Are You, based on all the incredible insights we got from our interviews for this project. And that includes the successes and the failures, even the epic ones. If you want to take it for a spin, you can find the link in our show notes, on my website, bradenwheatcroft.com, or DM me the word partner1 on Instagram. That's the word partner, all lowercase with the number 1 on Instagram. Okay, let's dive into the episode. Our first stop today is with a person who has been helping agents assemble successful businesses for over 24 years. But he's been educating people for even longer.
A little bit of my past history. I'm an engineer by trade, graduated in mechanical engineering, was in engineering, and then I got into real estate, and then from real estate transitioned into teaching, got my master's in education, and then from there got into the coaching realm with Richard Robbins, who was my previous partner in real estate. Dana Richard. I work exclusively with Richard Robbins International. I'm a coach, a business coach, head of the coaching division. We have a real estate training and coaching company, and we have 25 coaches, and we help members right across Canada and in Europe. We're helping people get to the next level in their business.
Now, Dana's bread and butter are real estate agents, but he's had a diverse background in coaching small businesses, including construction companies, insurance salespeople, and even meat brokers. One thing has stood out to Dana about all small businesses, however.
One thing we notice in the industry is that there isn't anything for small to medium-sized companies. Like large companies that you can think of, the IBMs of the world, they have everything available to them and managers and stuff like that to be better at their job. But a lot of small and medium-sized companies, they're basically organically grown and they just do sales, and the growth of their company is basically based on who they are, and they just grow slowly, but they've never been exposed to any sort of formal training on how to have a good working business.
Dana's seen a lot of business models over his quarter-decade coaching, so I asked him about his thoughts on partnerships specifically.
They don't work.
Okay. Dana always has been a direct communicator, but I challenged him to expand on this opinion for our benefit.
To have a successful partnership, the pieces that have to be perfect. There's a lot of people that try partnerships, but a lot of them get disgruntled in the partnership. So, and they're not willing to say, hey, to be successful, you have to have this criteria or you got to change the way you're doing it. And most of them don't want to, because a lot of partnerships, they're very successful agents and, they have a bit of ego. And so as a result, they're thinking, well, if I partner with this person, you can imagine how much more business we can be doing. And instead, there's a lot of conflict, right? That comes out after year 2 or 3.
So either Dana has been reading our research from the partnership project, or he's confirming what we've learned up to this point. Partnerships are high risk, but they're also high reward. So I asked him to indulge me in what advice he would give if I wanted to take that risk to get the reward. And he answered my question with a question.
Why do you want to create a partnership? What is it that you want to get out of the partnership? You want to make sure you're getting into a partnership because something is missing potentially, right? Like there may be potentially you're great at sales, but you're not great in the back end. So you're looking for somebody who complements you. So you want to look at somebody, like there's different ingredients as to why you want to be in a partnership. You know, you want to share experiences with each other, and you want to have, it's a lonely business, as you know, in real estate. So sometimes having a partner, you're with somebody all the time, you're talking to them, you can bounce ideas off, and that means something, right? We can leverage each other's strengths, and together our database can sell up a storm. Like the people we know and our sales strength combined together will produce a lot. But to say we're like full partners and this is just how we operate, and they do it for a very long time, that is very difficult.
Dana believes that most agents underestimate a critical difference in how you can operate as a solo agent versus one who is now sharing that business with another.
What they don't realize is you are creating, in a partnership, you're creating a business. And when you create a business, there's many elements. It's more than just doing sales, right? It's running a business. It's marketing strategy. It's creating, responsibility for different tasks and who are supposed to be doing that. It's not like, hey, let's just work together and have fun and make lots of money. On the outside, that sounds great. When you get down to the nuts and bolts, there's a lot of moving parts. And then that's where, especially in real estate, a lot of real estate agents don't think about the moving parts, the details, and thinking that it'll all work out. If you don't know what you're getting into, a lot of times after a while, it's like, oh, well, this isn't as fun as I thought it would be. And then it starts breaking down. If you have the same value system, and that's one of the key elements of creating a partnership, is you want to see who is that partner. Do they share the same values? Can you get along with them? It's like a marriage. A partnership is like a marriage where you're getting married for a certain reason, and you have similar values, and everyone has a certain sort of position. They do certain things in the marriage, just like you would do in a partnership. Probably in your partnership at your company, Braden, you have your duties, your other partner has other duties. And from that, you can leverage yourself and grow the business, right? And so too often they're not thinking in those terms. They're just thinking, well, let's have fun and let's do things together. A couple things here. They didn't create a sort of a business plan, like a 2, 5, 10-year vision as to where they want to take it. Okay. I think that's important. Then they're just floundering. A lot of times I see two people working as one entity. So they become a partner, and then they both go on listing presentations. They both show property together. So really, all of a sudden, they're both doing the same thing. And as a result, they're not leveraging yourself. The roles, they recognize at the beginning, hey, you know what? I don't like this entity. I like sales. I'll do sales. You do the back end. On the onset, that seems like a great plan, but then all of a sudden it feels like, okay, I'm doing all the sales, I'm bringing in all the money, and I'm giving it away. So then as a result, there becomes this animosity, and it's like, well, I work harder than you, or my job's more important than yours. So that's why it fails.
Dana points to two components of the partnership structure that should be in place. First, understand that each position from sales to admin has a dollar value to it. And second, that every salesperson should be on a split with their own team. Dana explains in more detail next.
Find what each position is worth. You have to put a dollar value on what each position is worth and say, I'll take that position, and you say, okay, well, it's worth that much. And that's one of the differences. They don't put their money in as an agent. They're split. Pretend you're an agent, just like Annie working on any team. And I'm just going to make this up. Say you're on a 50-50 split and you put 50% into the team. Whoever is doing the sales needs to put 50% into the team coffers, because doing sales is a job. So 50% goes to the team to pay off the bill. So that you got to treat yourself as an agent on a team on a regular split, as opposed to, hey, I get 100% of my commission. That's the wrong idea. Don't do that, because if you happen to do more deals than the other person, then it's like, hey, I'm making a lot of money and I'm giving it away. Well, under normal circumstances, you'd be giving 50% away anyways. Because what happens is when you create a team, think of it as there's 3 different entities. So for example, say you're the salesperson, so you're a licensed sales agent. There's a team, that's a different entity that has to pay the bills. And then there's Dana, who say maybe runs the office. And so say I'm an office manager, that's a different job. So as a result, what happens is when you sell a house, you're paying for the services of selling that house, meaning you're paying for marketing and all that. That costs something. The team pays for it. That's the 50%. So that's why salesperson, you're getting 50% as you sold it. If I sold a house, I'd put 50% in and I would keep the 50%. But because I also do the back end work, I'm also pulling out a salary for doing some admin jobs, because that's what I'm saying. Each job is worth something. So as a result, the team is worth something. So it doesn't matter. If we said we're partners and we're going to split the profits and everyone has a job, then your contribution to the team, so if say you did all the sales, your contribution is 50% of the sales commission goes to the team. And then that pays all the expenses. My contribution might be working on the team and I get a salary of say $100,000. That's my contribution. At the end of the day, then we split the profits. A partnership means we're splitting the profits of the shares of the company. We're both 50-50 in the team. So we're splitting the team profits. We're not necessarily splitting the sweat equity of what we're doing on the team.
To recap, Dana is suggesting that every licensed person should pay a split to the team that is paying all the expenses. And if you are in a less sales role, say operations manager, you should define a dollar value for that wage of the role. So if one partner happens to sell less, but manages a lot more, they'll be compensated for their efforts. That makes sense to me, but it also sounds like a lot of work. Dana explains why this structure sets you up for future success.
Eventually, if the team gets profitable enough, I can still own 50% of the team and spend all my time in Mexico. I'm not going to be getting the 100,000 being the administrator, but I'm still getting the 50% of the profits because we've hired administrators. We've hired more real estate agents to contribute to the team. But because of the contribution of the sales agent into the team, I'm still getting the benefit of 50% of the profit of the team. If the other person wants to stay in the city selling real estate, you're going to make 50% and I'm getting nothing from it. So that's why each job needs to have a value on it. So if I eventually say, you know what, I hired somebody for my position, I'm just going to take 50% of the profit, that's okay. But most of the time, agents don't do that. They say, you're selling, I'm selling. And it's like, well, then we're just sales agents, right? Saying hi to each other every day. That's not what it's about, right? So we have to create a team, a business. We're creating a business. We just happen to also sell.
Say hi to each other every day? That makes me think of the old Looney Tunes cartoon of Ralph Wolf and Sam Sheepdog punching their time cards before they start their shifts for the day. Don't remember that? Okay, just YouTube it. But if all those hard numbers and splits threw you off, Dana has some suggestions on a more soft skill approach to designing your alliance.
You have to decide when you create the business plan what each person is great at. Because where it could come into challenges is when people make decisions over something. Otherwise, there'll be no decision made. So say, for example, I'm the master at marketing. Then we would brainstorm on marketing. But then at the end of the day, I'm going to say, this is what we're going to do in marketing. So somebody's going to have a final decision in the job that they specialize in. So you will find out what everyone's strengths are. And then you say, okay, you're great at that. We'll brainstorm Monday morning about if necessary. But at the end of the day, you make the final decision because you're the expert in that category.
Regardless of which path you take, whether it's a more complex one or perhaps something a little bit more organic and intuitive, both will likely fail, according to Dana, if you get siloed in the day-to-day and forget to work on the business of your partnership.
The other thing is you want to have quarter meetings about the business, because what happens is originally it was like, hey, Braden, unless you and I get together, we'll make a ton of money in the city and we'll have lots of fun and it's great. So then after 6 months, what happens is that we shake hands on it and then we don't talk about it ever again. So what you want to do is you want to have more or less business meetings every 6 months and saying, how's it going? Are we hitting all of our marks, like in our metrics? Are we happy with, what's going on? Are we happy with each other? And a lot of teams don't have those meetings. They never have any meetings. They just get disgruntled, and then eventually one falls out of the picture.
Sitting and speaking with one of the top business coaches in Canada, I couldn't help but ask him to give me an action plan for finding a partner if I decided that was something I wanted to do, even knowing the risks. And Dana was kind enough to oblige.
If I had to make it a prescription, I would first have my sights set out as to who I'm looking for. Like, why do I want a partnership? I would sort of, on the down low, test drive of the person. I would take them out for coffee, maybe hang out with them, maybe go golfing with them, whatever that may be, send some business their way, ask if they could take over some of my business and see how it works out. Then I would start that conversation. If we were serious, I would create a formal business plan and have them understand that the business is the business and sales is just a component of the business. It doesn't mean if you do more sales than me, it's a bad partnership. It could be the best partnership, meaning is the business profitable? Sales is just a job in the business, the partnership, right? So I would create all the jobs in the partnership, figure out who's going to do it. If no one's going to do it, we'd hire for it. And then we would say, are we happy with it? Looks pretty good. Make sure you contribute as an agent to the team, because the team is what pays the bills, not the agents. The team pays the bills. And then once you understand that concept, it makes it a lot easier. Too often partnerships always say, hey, let's just go make a lot of money, and then, we'll just pay for some of the few expenses and we'll take home a lot of stuff. You can't think of it as that way. You got to think of it as paying into this entity that you and I happen to own.
If you can't tell by now, Dana is an analytical numbers guy. But don't get me wrong, he's got a great sense of humor and is very kind. But I wouldn't describe him as the most touchy-feely fellow. So I wasn't sure what he would say when I told him that one of the X factors I've seen in the successful partnerships I've interviewed is that they genuinely love each other.
You would treat them like a brother. Like, I would do things for him more than I probably would with my brothers. Seriously, like if he needed something, I'd be there for him. Like, it's that way. You want to, how sometimes it's like, it's family. You do it no matter what. Well, when it's a partnership, a strong partnership, you're going to do the right thing. And, sometimes we mess up and it's like, okay, well, we're family. Like, what do we do to move forward? You have to have that mindset, and then you can sort of overlook a lot of little things.
What didn't make it into this episode is that Dana actually met Richard Robbins when Rich was selling real estate and Dana was looking to buy an investment. Rich went on to convince Dana to get his own real estate license, and then they went on to go into real estate business together as partners. Eventually, Rich went on to start a coaching company that, full circle, Dana now leads the coaching division. If that's not warm and fuzzy, I don't know what is. Dana gave us some great things to consider regarding how we structure our partnership. But I think you would agree that if that plan were only scribbled on the back of a napkin, or worse, only in our heads, it wouldn't really serve us. And that's where our next expert comes in.
Yeah, the purpose of that agreement is to govern the two parties' working relationship and business relationship from start to finish. And it's meant to set up the roles and expectations of the parties with respect to who is to do what, who is to be paid what, who is responsible for what costs, and then in the event of disputes, how you handle those, and then in the event of a breakdown in the relationship or just an exit, how you disentangle yourselves. So it's really supposed to be that backbone roadmap for how you operate together, start to finish. That's the goal of having a good partnership agreement in place. My name's Jesse Mullin, born and raised in Victoria, and I've been a lawyer for coming into my 9th year at my office, Mullin DeMayo Work. So I've got 4 partners that I work with, including myself. We're a real estate focused law firm. So, what we do at the office is primarily residential conveyancing work, so working with clients and realtors on their transactions. We handle real estate development work, and then, a little bit of corporate work and a little bit of wills and estates.
I've worked with Jesse and his father, John, for over a decade. They've consistently contributed to the educational programs we run at our brokerage. One of the things we love about working with the Mullins is that they're real estate focused, but have a comprehensive view of the real estate industry. Jesse elaborates.
Because those complement what we do as our main focus. We actually have a decently robust corporate practice as part of what we do. And it's kind of grown based on quite frankly, the development work that we do and the developers that we assist. But, interacting with realtors, developers, everyone in the real estate world, without a doubt, joint venture agreements, partnership agreements, which we'll get into a little bit more. I prefer to call it a team participation agreement if we're talking about it from the legal perspective, but we'll get into why that is. A partnership agreement adequately describes it for the purposes of the conversation. And also just kind of generally advising the realtors that we work with, perhaps not on I've engaged you as my lawyer for this issue, but talking through issues that come up with these types of agreements. We're pretty familiar with what they look like. So without a doubt, there's experience there on the corporate side of what we do.
I booked Jesse for a conversation on partnership agreements, to which he agreed to. But when I met him at his office, he pulled a bit of a terminology bait and switch on me, which, as it turns out, words matter.
Yeah. So right now, what we're talking about today is a contract between two individuals that guides and governs their business relationship together. And we're referring to it as a partnership agreement. We have something in BC called a piece of legislation in BC called the Partnership Act. And so the Partnership Act is a law that governs rules, liabilities, and responsibilities for legal entities that are partnerships. And a lot of the time, you have expanded liability associated with your partner's actions under a partnership pursuant to the Partnership Act. Agreements between realtors in these circumstances may be better described as team participation agreements, because these team participation agreements will often try to, pursuant to a term in the contract or terms in the contract, disclaim the Partnership Act by saying that the parties are working together on this business venture. Here's all the terms. However, they are specifically agreeing that they are not partners pursuant to the Partnership Act. So I think it's an important distinction to make for everyone, just to recognize that we're calling these things partnership agreements, but we don't always want them to be partnerships pursuant to the Partnership Act. So making sure that your contract appropriately disclaims the Partnership Act and the application of that act is an important factor of the agreement. And whether or not it should be a partnership under the Partnership Act, I would think in most circumstances it will not be, and you don't want it to be, because of the different liability obligations and tax implications associated with being a partnership. But it's possible that you want it to be based on advice that governs their relationship. And then you can have a separate agreement that would be perhaps a team members agreement. You could call it a team participation agreement as well. But those terms may look very different for those other team members. When they join the team, their ability to participate in the revenues and commission splits, I'm sure, will look different than the two team members that started this.
Jesse surprised me when he said the most important reason to have this agreement has a lot more to do with the potential end of your partnership rather than the beginning or even the middle.
It's easy to have those rose-colored glasses on at the start of a business relationship. And I think that it is one of those things that's easily overlooked by parties is the possible end to the relationship. And that can be an end just natural course, so that can be an end by dispute and kind of the relationship burning to the ground. It's a critical aspect of the agreement between them. I think that disentangling the relationship and the business assets, which would include everything from perhaps physical assets to staff that work with you to the client relationships that are obviously most critical for realtors. So how are we separating everything to move forward?
Well, that was rather bleak. The optimist in me doesn't love the idea of game planning the end of it all right at the start, but I can see how that'd be very practical if the partnership ended. It's kind of like insurance policy. You don't want to use it, but you're glad to have it when you do. But could this agreement also serve as a tool to prevent a tragic ending?
Dispute conflict resolution in terms of any agreement that's in place between parties that are working together for a common purpose, contemplating how you handle disputes is really important. What's interesting when I was thinking about dispute resolution in these agreements is that I was wondering to myself, for those successful people or partnerships that you've talked to, what kind of agreement do they have in place? Because I bet you some of them don't have any agreement. Some of them don't have agreements that contemplate dispute resolution. Wearing the lawyer's hat, it's important to contemplate that, of course, right? So dispute resolution would contemplate how you handle your little disagreements. Perhaps you set out a framework for the parties to meet, sit down, discuss issues, perhaps have a third party participate in resolving those issues. And that's kind of your phase one dispute resolution. So you just kind of set out a general framework for how you work together. And then, from there, you kind of get into the more and more serious options for dispute resolution. I think for parties that work together on a business, contemplating mediation is a really good idea, right? Mediation is going to be less expensive than court. It's going to be less expensive than arbitration. And I think it can be sometimes a gentler way to resolve disputes. So perhaps it's, set out the framework for how you sit down and talk if you need to, contemplate mediation, and then maybe it's binding arbitration. The goal of having a dispute resolution provision in your agreement is certainly to avoid court, right? Court's the end game that nobody should want. It's going to be the most expensive, the most time-consuming, and so it should always be contemplated. But that being said, when I was thinking about it, those successful partnerships that don't have these provisions there, they're probably solving disputes, resolving these matters day to day, week to week. So really great personalities complementing each other. You don't have to worry about these things.
I asked Jesse about what type of conflict would be worth going to mediation over. I pitched a few examples, like one agent willing to take an overpriced listing and spending top dollar for the marketing and knowing it likely won't sell, all while their partner is in protest.
A good agreement may contemplate how you resolve that type of dispute. I'm sure the business coach talked about a whole bunch of considerations for what you need to think about when you're working together. From my perspective, you're coming to the lawyer with everything on the back of your napkin, but that better be a big napkin because you should have spoken to each other and discussed all these potential disputes that could come up. And this is a great example of a business dispute that will, I'm sure, come up for realtors over the course of a partnership. And so that is the type of dispute that you should contemplate. And that can be handled a variety of different ways. Your agreement could specifically resolve, or I should say, your agreement could specifically address how those types of decisions are to be made. Perhaps your agreement indicates that one of the partners will be the lead on any particular client matter. So let's just say it's a client that was brought in from a family referral. Well, that was brought in by agent one. And so agent one is the lead on that particular client. And perhaps the partnership agreement provides that agent one is going to make all of the primary decisions related to that client and their listing or that client and their potential purchase. We've resolved how that decision is to be made. Obviously, it could lead to conflict in the future if we're making bad decisions over and over. And so then we're getting into a bigger conflict. And a bigger conflict is easier resolved by mediation. A little conflict, we shouldn't have to go to mediation. So maybe your agreement has already contemplated that type of decision, and we know it's not going to be a conflict. Or alternatively, in that type of circumstance, maybe your agreement has provisions in it that address this scenario specifically. And it says, if one agent has the lead or one agent insists on taking a listing and they can't agree on the listing price, then perhaps you have a disproportionate sharing of the listing expenses. So then we can allow for those parties to disagree, but still proceed with the listing. And then agent two, who's unhappy with taking that listing at a higher price, isn't bearing an equal burden associated with the listing costs. So sometimes getting too specific in an agreement like this is not a good thing. But depending on the nature of the relationship between the parties and depending on the workload volume and different work types that they take on, maybe someone's got more listings, someone's got more purchases or purchasers that they work with, getting into the weeds on that type of dispute, in my opinion, is actually a good idea.
Okay, call me a lazy millennial. but that sounds like a lot of work. And when I voiced that to Jesse, he kind of put me in my place.
I think that it's worth that extra work, and it's not too much work. It's necessary work to have a good agreement in place. And so I'm not saying that your agreement needs to contemplate every single issue that can come up like this. But I'm saying that you two, as partners, need to have spoken to each other about how you're going to resolve a variety of types of issues. And if it's listing issues like this that we're talking about, the two of you need to understand how you're going to handle those decisions. And then your agreement can simply say, you've got to equally decide, mutually agree on the listing price for a listing before you invest the funds to deal with that. If it's a scenario where each of you are okay with the lead realtor acting on a client's matter, making the final call, perfect. But you need to have thought about it. You need to have discussed it. And then the agreement doesn't need to be really technical, but you have to have wrapped your head around that.
Most people would like to avoid conflict if they could. But Jesse says planning for conflict in your agreement makes a lot of sense.
A good agreement should certainly reflect the individual's personalities when it comes to conflict. Even a simple provision in the agreement that the parties both agree on that says that, if one party is unhappy with decisions being made, that both parties agree that they will allocate a time to sit down and discuss those matters, or they will regularly discuss those matters on a certain day of a certain week. It doesn't have to be as rigid, is probably a good idea, because then it gives that one partner that's maybe conflict avoidant the ability to lean on that agreement and say, well, we always thought about this. And so there's this mechanism. My partner was okay with it, so we're going to sit down and we're going to talk.
I asked Jesse if I was to call him at his office and told him I was meeting with someone that I saw a potential future working alongside, what guidance would he give me?
As soon as you bring up the idea of a partnership agreement and a good fit and the fact that you've spent all that time together, tells me that we've got individuals that are thinking they match on a good level. And so what I would tell that individual, I would tell you when you're calling me, is you have to think about the following main components of how you're going to handle your relationship together. And that's going to cover off the following. It's going to be who is doing what? What are your roles in the business relationship? Are both of you going to be out marketing, getting new clients, doing deals? Or is there going to be a different kind of division of labor? Is one of you out there marketing and the other is handling more back-end work? So think about what your roles are, get an idea of that. Your agreement has to contemplate that appropriately. Money. This is all about money at the end of the day, or to a certain extent, it's about money because this is a business relationship. And so how are you going to handle the split of commissions and income associated with the business relationship? On top of that, how are you going to handle the expense sharing between the two of you? I think that people will often underestimate how complex the relationship can be when it comes to differing levels of volume of work between partners. So having turned your minds to how you're going to make sure both of you feel appropriately compensated for the workload that you're each taking on is critical. So what are your roles and responsibilities? How are you handling the money aspects of this relationship? How are you going to handle your dispute resolution? Dispute resolution is going to be critical for this agreement. And that's the big disputes and the little disputes. When I say dispute resolution, I probably should have said first decision making, because who's making what decisions where? And then if there's fights over those decisions, how are you handling the resolution of those disputes? And then every partnership ends, and you've got to think about it. How are you going to disentangle yourselves? And how do the parties choose to end this relationship? Do they have an ability to end that relationship unilaterally with some notice? And when they do, who is working with what clients? Who gets what assets? The name, for example. Easy one. You've got a team name, you've marketed, you've been doing it for 2 years. People know the name around town. At the end of this relationship, who gets the team name? So those are the critical aspects of what the agreement needs to contain. From there, you're going to go talk about that with your partner. You're going to come up with a game plan framework. And after that, I think you're going to sit down with a lawyer, myself, someone else, and talk through that to see where there's holes and where the gaps are to fill them in.
Jesse points out that even a great partnership agreement, team participation agreement, can become a liability.
People underestimate the complexity of how the relationship can grow. And so they put a simple agreement in place that's too simple. So oversimplifying the relationship and not contemplating the somewhat complex nature of being realtors in this day and age, which is, I have referrals coming through social media. I have referrals coming from friends and family. I have referrals coming through my website. I have referrals coming through all these different sources. And if I didn't contemplate that in my agreement and how we share those clients, we're going to have disputes over that in the future. So I think oversimplifying, perhaps based on underestimating the complexity of that relationship, is one of the mistakes that I do see. One of the other big issues that we can see come up is a failure to revisit and revise the terms of the agreement as the relationship grows. And so it's a really critical point, because this document you put together based on the outset of your relationship and everything that you've talked about, it's going to change over time. And so it's really important, in my view, that every year, even on a shorter timeline, both of you sit down and look at that agreement and make sure it reflects what you're doing. Because I've certainly seen it myself, where individuals have had maybe a short form agreement in place and they've been partners for a decent amount of time, let's say a few years. And then that relationship breaks down and the agreement doesn't appropriately consider what they've been doing for the last year, which is perhaps they're doing splits differently. Perhaps clients have come in from different sources that they didn't think about in the original agreement. And so without any doubt, revisiting the agreement and not being afraid to amend it to reflect the current circumstances is a great idea. It's easy to forget about it, and it's not like it's a necessity to come back to it on a regular basis. And I would say, I'm sure the relational aspects are more critical, quite frankly, but there's no reason that when you have those regular meetings, you set as part of one of those periodic meetings a review of the agreement, because it's a great way for you also to assess where you started and where you've come to. And it'll allow you to make sure that that agreement accurately reflects where you're at. And that's really important. To be honest with you, by the time you're done getting that agreement in place at the outset with your lawyer, you should have a pretty intimate understanding of how the agreement functions, because it should be an accurate reflection of what your expectations are between the two of you. I don't know that you need to have any formal process to go through that agreement. And I think personally what you need to do is make sure you understand it at the outset. And then when you're reviewing it, you're reviewing that agreement in the context of how things are working now.
So how are things working out? It's easy to think that having the world's best strategy from a business coach that is then put into an ironclad contract by a lawyer would darn near ensure success. But who are we kidding? As the saying goes, it's really straightforward until people get involved. And where there are people, there are feelings, egos, and trauma.
I always say I make people cry for a living, but really what I do is I am a therapist. So I work with people who are coming in with all sorts of struggles, behavior patterns that they need to change, life skills that they need to learn on communication, all that.
This is Ginger Henderson, a therapist with years of experience helping couples navigate difficult times together.
A lot of my practice, I'm going to say about 70%, is geared towards couples. Working a lot with couples who, come together hoping for the best, wanting to make it work, wanting to build a family, a life, all sorts of things, and then they just don't know how. Or they've been doing this race for 10, 16 years, whatever it is, and they realize they've been doing it in a way that hasn't worked for so long that it's become their behavior patterns, and they need help on how to undo it all and start over, which isn't really a couple, but I will have mother-daughter, mother-son. I've had a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, which was awesome, very healing for them. So you'll have that kind of dynamic, which I guess could be classified more as family counseling, but I kind of call it couples counseling because there's just two people. So couples is two. But yeah, for the most part, though, yeah, I would say 90%, 95% is couples. You learn along the way as to what it is that you enjoy working with, what it is that you have a passion for working with. It's important to know what works for you so that you can be better for your clients. So couples is just something that I specialize in it because I learned I really enjoy it.
I asked Ginger what attracted her to the niche of working with couples, whether that's intimate relationships or family members or even working colleagues. And her answers seem to line up with what I've seen from the business coaching perspective.
It's just juicier. There's just so much more to it because you've got two people coming in with their own backgrounds, their own childhood experiences. And we'll get into more of this later, but one of the things I love to refer to it as is their emotional backpack. And so they're coming in with all of the experiences that they've had in their life, their sense of self, what their dad used to say to them when they were 5, what their school teacher used to say to them in grade 2, like all of that. And so you put that together and you teach them why they are the way they are, and then why their partner is the way they are. And it's just watching that grow and watching them learn about themselves and then learn about each other and develop that empathetic perspective is so rewarding.
When asked about the difference between her couples clients, whether being romantically involved versus more platonic ones, Ginger says there isn't much difference.
A lot of people don't understand why the reactions they're having are there. It's always broken down to needs. So everybody coming in here is coming in with needs, whether that be to be heard, seen, validated, empathized with. Everybody's coming in here with needs. So whether it be a father, son, mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, whatever it is that we're working with humans that are coming in with needs. And my job is to help them understand each other's needs. And then what are we doing to work towards getting all of the needs met from each other? Obviously not all of the needs in their lives, but all of the needs in the relationship met. I get to sit with people and teach them why they're experiencing what they're experiencing and validate that, and then help them understand themselves to such a degree that they get to trust themselves and gain that self-respect to stand up for what they need. And when you have two people in the room, that's what I mean by juicier, is you get to do all that teaching and then they learn and then they leave here, whether it be 6 months later, whether it be a year later, whether it be 8 years later, they leave here going, okay, I figured myself out.
Figuring yourself out. That sounds nice. But what does it look like when we don't have a clear sense of our needs? Or perhaps worse, we know what our needs are, but we're not getting them met.
Many self-sabotaging behaviors, anger outbursts, shutting down, avoidance in a relationship, anxiety in a relationship. We'll have anxious attachers who will have a complete lack of independence because they're completely codependent on their partner for giving them validation. And anytime we have somebody who's an anxious attacher, they often will find themselves in a relationship with an avoidant attacher. So again, teaching them that as to why they are an anxious attacher and why the other person's an avoidant, and just knowing all of the things that we're doing to get our needs met when we're doing them in a way that isn't helpful. It's because we were never taught. I often say anybody coming into my office between the ages of 40 and up, we're not taught any emotional regulation. We're not taught how to have individuality. We're not taught how to soothe themselves.
Well, if we were playing emotional dysregulation bingo, I certainly would have won by now. What was surprising to me was as she laid out all of those feelings and behaviors, was I found myself reflecting on those feelings and how they not just show up in my personal relationships, but in my professional ones too. It turns out Ginger has helped in that arena.
I've had work colleagues, 2 managers, late 30s, early 40s age group. They came to me and their boss essentially had sent them in to kind of exactly figure out their stuff. A lot of the issues there was not being heard and seen, and just really only seeing their side, and egos kind of coming into play where, somebody's going, I'm doing all the work and you're not doing the work and you don't see all the work I'm doing, and that kind of dynamic. When there's tasks at hand, when there's things that need to get done, and we have a different type of work ethic, from whatever reason that is, then I think that's where we get a lot of conflict as to how is Again, just like a relationship, how is the person showing up for you? And they were two people who only could see what they were doing and were only kind of going, hello, look at me, look what I'm doing, and not understanding the other person's perspective, what it was that they weren't doing or what they were doing that was triggering the other person. So again, coming to me with needs.
One thing that kept coming up in this conversation was the need to be seen. Are we talking about being seen in my awesome new outfit or the slick car I just bought? No, turns out she's referring to being seen on the inside that matters most.
So coming from a business partner's perspective, I would say, let's use real estate. Let's say that there is somebody who's they put the contract together, they contacted a lawyer to find out something about the division of the property, they did all those kinds of things, and the other business partner was maybe on holidays that day, or they were doing something else that day that was also business related, but not on that exact deal. I think a really important thing for a business partner to say is, I really appreciate that. Thanks for doing that. That's going to make that person feel seen, that all the work that they just put in, the other person recognizes. So it's being seen as recognition for what it is that you're doing that's maybe more than the other person. And I think some people will go, well, why should I have to do that? We're in a business partnership and this is part of the partnership is some of us will work more, some of us will not. Absolutely, sure, if we're just looking at it, the bare facts. But if we want a partnership to work, then that recognition is going to bond us more.
How one person needs to be seen may be very different than another. But one thing we do all have in common is that sense of who we are is formed very early in life. And we bring that little version of ourselves everywhere we go as adults.
Just so we all know, if we can all be clear about this, our 8-year-old self is going to every business deal you're going to. Your 8-year-old self is going to every meeting you go to because that person is following you around with the needs that weren't met in childhood. I just sort of go back to that because I think it's when we can kind of remember things. I have this term I like to use a lot. It's called your SOS, your sense of self. Your sense of self is developed by the age of 9. What that means is by the age of 9, every message you've got from your parents, your siblings, your school, your peers, what you said to yourself when you're looking in the mirror, all of that stuff is accumulated. And by the age of 9, you are now starting to develop who you think you are. And what you think about relationships and what you think about the environment that you're in, it's starting to be created by the age of 9. So to me, I think 8, 9, you can say your 9-year-old self is following you around to every meeting. It really helps you when you understand that. If everybody can just sit with themselves and go, by the age of 9, what was the messaging that I got? What role did I play?
Cultivating self-awareness seems to be a key ingredient to a successful relationship. If you don't know what your needs are or your sense of self, how could anyone else support you? So I asked Ginger about one of the more pop culture books on self-awareness, The 5 Love Languages. And she had a really interesting take on it.
So when it comes to the love language book and the quiz that I recommend everybody does, I think the one thing that's really important to do with that, though, is why. So if your love language is acts of service, why is it acts of service? When did that begin in you that was a need that you had? Because that could be that your parents didn't do anything for you and you had to do everything alone, and that's showing up for you in your adult life now. Or, you know what I mean? So love language quiz can be really helpful, but understanding the why of it is significant. And I think that there's a lot of things that as business partners should be talked about before we commit to being business partners. And one of them would be that. Let's go over how do you like to be recognized?
And once we have a better idea of who we are, we need to become our own advocates.
We have to normalize asking for things as adults. You don't really go around and say to people what you need on a regular basis, but if you're going to go into a partnership, it's really important for you to be able to be comfortable enough with your partner to say, hey, I like to be told if I'm doing a good job. Doesn't that feel weird to say as an adult? It's really societal.
Building off Jesse Mullin's legal advice for contemplating conflict in your partnership agreements, Ginger says that planning for conflict is part of a healthy partnership. Avoiding conflict, not so much.
If you're in a partnership, you need to plan for conflict. You have to plan for, and again, it always comes back to self-awareness. You have to understand that conflict is going to happen. If you're in a partnership, you're going to piss each other off. You're going to hurt each other's feelings. You're going to not show up perfectly. So what do we do? And if you're in that self-awareness, we have to understand, am I somebody that shuts down? Am I somebody that has angry outbursts, whatever it is. So if we as a partnership can understand, oh, when Bob loses the deal, he gets really insecure because he never felt really good enough in his childhood. So therefore, that trigger is going to make him feel like he's going to shut down or whatever it is. And so we've now, as a partnership, we've talked about that. When I'm really upset, I shut down. Okay, thanks for telling me, Bob. So when you're going to shut down, I'm going to give you an hour to kind of take a breather, and then we're going to come together and come up with a plan. Sure, that sounds great. Like, how can we have a good conversation about what conflict looks like? The biggest thing is, and again, now we go to that empathetic perspective. So we empathize with why Bob is shutting down. We empathize with what it is that's going on for him that's bigger than just losing the deal. And then I think the other part of the communication that's really important, which I get all of my couples to do, is I get them to do a relationship check-in. And I think we need to know that if we're going to be in a business partnership, we have to have a business check-in. Every weekend, how's it going? Anything I've done that's pissed you off today? Like, what does it look like? How are we doing this check-in with each other? Maybe it's not once a week. Maybe it's once a month. We have a meeting where we go over, yes, our business, but us. How are we showing up for each other?
When finding your ideal business partner, Ginger also uses the marriage metaphor to encourage potential partners to take it slow and get to know each other, just like you would if you were picking a life partner.
And I think that also, again, understanding who you're partnering up with. If you see somebody who's really successful in business and man, they're killing it and they're getting all those deals, wonderful. But you need to make sure that you're spending time with that person before you're ready to partner up with them. How do they act in traffic? How do they act when they're, it's like dating. I really highly suggest that if somebody's not in a partnership at this point, but they're considering it, that they need to take it as if they're dating, in the sense of, how does this person, do they show care? Do they speak with their ego first? Do they listen to me? When we have conversations, take them out for lunch and just talk about business. Watch how they show up. Do they show up with their ego? Do they cut you off? Do they spoil your opinion? All of those things. Then that's not somebody you're going to want to, even if they're the most successful realtor in Victoria. You do not want to partner up with somebody who is run by their ego and looks like they aren't willing to do the work.
So often when we're thinking about the benefits of a successful partnership or the risks of being in a failing one, we are looking across the table at our partner. But Ginger closes up the conversation by encouraging us to look in the mirror instead.
But this is the thing, is that if we're going to help people be better in partnerships, they have to be willing to understand their SOS and understand how their ego shows up.
Over the past 3 episodes, we've seen firsthand how incredibly rewarding a partnership can be. We also got personal insight into how rife with failure they are. Our experts today gave us the blueprint, the roadmap, and some soft skills to make the most out of a partnership if we were to give one a shot. But I am curious, if you got lucky enough to enjoy one successful partnership, would you be brave enough to try it again?
I started to really put together a list of potential partners that I could see myself working with, or partners that did a good deal of business.
Remember this guy from part 1? Shane King of the Hatter King real estate team. His partner Bruce had just put Shane on notice that he was going to be retiring, which meant Hatter King was about to become king. Shane had a tough decision ahead on whether he wanted to go it alone, join another team, or take the risk to find another business partner in an attempt to replicate the magic he once had with Bruce. Shane walks us through his next steps.
Yeah, there were probably 6 people on the short list of people that I have either approached or would have approached. I reached out to 3 of them. Yeah, no, it was great. It was, kind of no different than me meeting Bruce for coffee at Starbucks 12 years ago.
You decided you had these 3 coffees. How did they go? Were they all winners? Was it really hard? Was it obvious by the end of 3 coffees?
It was good. And the question never was, would you partner with me? Would you consider it? It was more so, listen, I'm just kind of at the early stages of trying to figure out what to do with my next steps. Bruce is retiring. We didn't make any formal commitments. It was more fact-finding.
Yeah. And after doing your fact-finding, was there a clear standout in your mind?
No question. I met with Ali Monroe. Ali was with a different brokerage. Ali started out in real estate at the same time I did. As a matter of fact, our licenses are about 2 weeks apart. So we're both licensed for 16 years now. I know Allie quite well. We've done a fair amount of transactions together and see each other's stuff on social media and such. And so I called up Allie for a couple reasons. I called her up to meet with her, and I actually kind of baited her a little bit. And I said, I'd like to talk to you about what kind of a father-daughter partnership looks like, because, my daughter's thinking about getting licensed, and I know that you worked very closely with your dad for the majority of your career. So I wanted to sit down and talk with her about that. At that point, I felt comfortable breaking the news to her that Bruce was going to be retiring, and that I think it was on our first lunch, I said, would you be interested in joining forces? She didn't say yes right away. I think we were both kind of excited about it, is the sense I got. But, there were a couple different moving pieces.
How far down the path did you get with Allie before you brought it up with Bruce? Did you tell Bruce ahead of time before that first lunch?
I remember having a discussion with Bruce, because Bruce, of course, worked with Allie for many years as well. They worked at the same brokerage. I don't remember, honestly, if it was before the lunch or after the lunch, but I do remember having a conversation with Bruce, and it was just simply, hey, what do you think of Allie Monroe? I knew what his answer was going to be because, who doesn't love Allie? So Bruce, he said immediately, yeah, he said, that would be a great fit. I had his blessing right from the start.
So when did Allie officially join the team?
Allie officially joined the team, I believe it was November of 2023. There was about a month overlap there.
So there was a period of time where your humble team of 2 licenses doubled in size to 4.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And then can you maybe just take us to the day that Bruce retired?
Bruce retired. It was a tough day. And it, kind of wasn't just one specific day, of course, because there was about a week leading up to, his last day here at the office. But probably one of the tougher days in my career was when Bruce packed up his computer and walked out to his truck. Got a little teary.
Do you remember saying anything to him on his way out?
Yeah, don't let the door hit you in the ass.
That's about as much sentiment I'm going to get out of Shane King.
Happy hunting, happy fishing.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to Season 1 of Reflections, the power and peril of real estate partnerships. If you are a little more curious about whether a partnership is worth pursuing, please do yourself a favor and take our quiz, How Partner Ready Are You? By checking out the link in our show notes or on the podcast page of my website, or simply by DMing me the word partner1 on Instagram. That's the word partner, all lowercase with the number 1 on Instagram. Make sure you stay tuned for the bonus episodes, which are lightly edited full-length versions of the interviews we did on this project, except for the anonymous ones. Don't worry, your secrets are safe with me. Thank you again for listening to Reflections. I'm broker owner and business coach Braden Wheatcroft. Coach B out.